All right. Well, good afternoon. Welcome back from lunch. My name is Michael Andrews, and I'm based in Rome. And I want to speak about a topic I think is of growing importance to the field of content strategy, and that is how do we make effective recommendations to our audiences? And I'm going to introduce a concept I'm calling content attractors. So I want us to imagine that we're doing lots of things really right. We're producing some fantastic content. People are interested in what we're producing. They're talking about it in social media. You're getting a lot of first-time visitors to your website. How can we build on this momentum? What do we do next? Well, if you're feeling lucky, perhaps you're just going to suggest something else to them randomly and hope that they like it. Perhaps if you're feeling very confident and cocky, you may try to convert these people right away and get their email address. But if you're seeing this as an opportunity to build a relationship with some first-time visitors and try to get them to understand more about what you as a brand are about, maybe you want to suggest to them some other content you have that they might be interested in. So many websites have a recommended for you section, and it will list some links that they think people might be interested in. New York Times has had this feature for a long time. And earlier this year, the New York Times redesigned their website and made this recommended for you section a little bit more visually prominent than it had been in the past. And people noticed the recommendations in a way that they hadn't before. And they noticed these recommendations didn't really seem to reflect what they as individuals were interested in. They didn't think they indicated who they were as people. And people complained, to the point where the public editor of the New York Times looked at her own recommendations the New York Times was offering her and felt the New York Times thought that she was not a fun person. I think the story about the complaints that recommendations done poorly can generate actually show the damage to a brand that poor recommendations can do. And we think we're chasing after a few more page views, and in fact, we're hurting the brand. Now, it might be tempting to think that this is just a problem that the New York Times has, but in fact, most brands do a really bad job at recommendations. Some recommendations are just comically bad. People notice them, they're just strange. Where did this come from? Or why did they think that I'm like this? And the problem is that the way we make recommendations is fundamentally flawed, I believe. We're trying to make these recommendations based on data about groups of people. And we kind of vainly hope that if we just get a little bit more data about people, the recommendations are suddenly going to get better. So it's a little bit like skeet shooting. You have the party that's doing the targeting and is trying to predict where that target is going. And before that target reaches its destination, someone wants to interrupt the target. Now, we don't, as individuals, like to feel like we're clay pigeons, but more to the point, as humans, it's hard to predict what we want. It really is very difficult. And very often the guest is wrong about what they think we want. And we just feel the interruption, and it's very unpleasant. So we, every day, are presented with dozens of recommendations of content to look at. We probably aren't even aware of how much content we are presented with because we don't even pay attention to it. It just doesn't seem relevant. And perversely, when we do pay attention to the content we're presented with, it's for the wrong reasons. We notice that the content seems to be just so narrow, and we think, I'm bigger than that. Or we keep seeing the same recommendation again and again, and we'd never have clicked on this recommendation. But there it is, and we think, what a stupid brand. I mean, they keep giving us the same recommendation, and I don't want it, but I keep seeing it. And so, we get a little testy about this. But beyond the fact that bad recommendations can alienate audiences, it also has this weird effect of actually being very inefficient with our content. So the myth is that there's this one very narrow piece of content that has this one very narrow audience segment that wants to see it. But we as individuals have broad interest. And targeting is really not very good for recommending content of a general interest, the type of things that a lot of us care about. It's not very good with helping us discover content that we might be interested in that we don't know about. And targeting is based on collecting lots of data. It's about things that happened long in the past. It's about things about people who may or may not have anything remotely to do with this, but someone's decided to put it in this pool of a segment. It could be about totally irrelevant things, or postal code, or shoe size, whatever it is, but it's not really getting at the stuff that we as individuals care about. What do we matter? What's important to us? So the question I've been thinking about is, how can we make recommendations more emotionally intelligent? And I think the way to do that is to get away from the idea of targeting, which is really about pushing content at people, and trying to get more around the idea of attraction. And there are three elements that need to come together for the attraction to happen. We need to think about, what do individuals find attractive in content? And as individuals, we're all going to find different things attractive. We need to think about what in our content is attractive. What matters to people? What's distinctive about it? And then we also need to think, how can we make the attraction happen? So let me talk about how this can happen. First, I want us to think about audience desires. And I want us to think about things people want, not things people need. As content strategists, we often will talk about things that people need. You need this. But we want to think about what people want, because this is what motivates people to look at our content. The problem, as we all know, is that people have a really tough time telling us what they want. They really they can't express it. But they know it when they see it. If they find something they like, they really enjoy it. And we want to be in a position where we can support that. So imagine you have a friend who's just discovered a new TV show, and they love it, and they want to watch every prior episode of that TV show all in one weekend. They do a binge viewing of that show. That's the kind of experience I think we ought to try to support with our recommendations. The content we have available, what is attractive about it? What matters to people? I want us to get away from this idea of a niche. This idea of, well, there's this one perfect thing if we just find the right person who wants it. Because we have broad interests. And it's generally the bigger interests that matter to us most in our lives. This is the stuff that moves us. And the recommendations. How do we make the recommendation happen? So I want to move away from this idea of targeting, which is really about pushing content. Think more about matching content with people, what they are interested in, the experiences they want, with the qualities of the content we have. What's unique about the content we have, and make that matching happen. So traditional publishers have long produced general interest content. You think about TV networks or general interest magazines. And what they've done in the past is they've created little sub-brands, because they realize that you need to be distinctive when you're talking about general topics. And they'll create little sub-brands like programs, and they expect that people will follow these programs over time. They'll learn what the program is about, the approach of the program, and they'll follow it. They'll build a loyal audience of followers. I don't think we can count on that anymore. There's no audience loyalty. There's too much content. Everything's available. And we need to be in a position where we can, whoever shows up, we're in a position to be able to present to them something that they would be interested in. What interests me is what's happening in the areas of streaming audio and streaming video. So you think about brands like Pandora or Netflix. They have spent a lot of effort to characterize their content. They've described it according to the emotional qualities of the content. They've actually put metadata around this to describe what the qualities are, and they use this to make recommendations to their customers about content they think their customers would be interested in. And they've had success with this, and this is something I think we can all build on. I mentioned the New York Times. very interested in improving the relevance of their content. Many of you probably know they had an internal report earlier this spring looking at how to improve their relevance. One of the big focuses was in creating new types of metadata. And one of the things specifically they looked at was defining the tone of a story and trying to match it with the mood of an audience. So it's really about taking the qualities of their content and matching it with the experiences that the audience is seeking. So I'm calling these qualities of your content attractors. And I want to distinguish this from some other concepts we use in content strategy, which are voice and tone. So your voice and tone are your constants that you use to communicate with people. And essentially it helps people feel that you're friendly, that you're not sort of a schizophrenic organization. There are lots of reasons you do this. But what I'm talking about is a little bit different than this. I'm talking about the kind of content that you have that really has much more of an emotional connection with audiences. And I'm suggesting for this sort of stuff that's of general interest that you don't want all this content to sound the same. You actually want some diversity in it, because if you have diversity, that's going to attract different people, different individuals, and that's going to actually make a stronger connection with your content. So I'm not talking about your style guide, I'm talking about your creativity. So maybe it's thinking about it, content like the art in an art gallery. Generally, we don't go to an art gallery to view portraits or landscapes or still lifes. We go there for an experience. And when we find an experience we like, we want to maintain that experience. We want to find if there's other art available that offers a similar experience. That's the sort of phenomena I would like for us to be able to support in our recommendations. So how might we do this? I think it's a four-step process. First, we need to identify the kinds of content we create that actually resonate with individuals. You know, not talking about your utilitarian content. I'm talking about stuff that really people find important to them. We need to understand what the qualities of this content are, what makes it distinct and special. We need a process for actually presenting this to people, and we need to make sure that we have a way of seeing how effective we are. So I'll walk you through how this might work. So I'll do a little bit more about this idea of general interest content. This is content that people might be interested in even if they weren't seeking it out. So it's not necessarily something they've typed into Google and landed on your page. Maybe they just stumbled across it. Maybe someone recommended it to them. But once they've discovered it, it was worth their effort to actually look at it, because it's stuff they want. It's not stuff they need. And that's really important. And depending upon what you do as a brand, it may be related to maybe some content marketing collateral you create, and it might address a topic, anything from personal finance to parenting to travel. It's this sort of big general things that, many of us are interested in. And it's not one audience segment that's interested in it. It's many different kinds of people who may not have that much in common with one another. So that's why this whole idea of segmentation doesn't really work well. But because it's stuff that matters to people, it actually has a lot of impact potential. We need to understand what makes that content distinctive, because lots of people are talking about these general interest topics. If you just create general interest topics, you're just going to be more noise out there. So what is distinctive about it? And really understand that, well. And what we want to do is actually characterize that and give that a description that we can put as metadata, structural metadata associated with our content. Now, if you create content of a general nature and you're not really sure what's distinctive about it, this is a great opportunity for you to talk to people who view your content and ask them what stands out to them about your content, what's special about it. Ask them to look at your competitors' content, what's special about their content on the same topics. But I'm going to give you some ideas about things to be thinking about that could be attractors, things that you may be already using or things that you want to be using in your content to make it distinctive, because this will be important for improving the recommendations. So one of the key types of attractors is the attitude of the content. So let's imagine you're a nonprofit and you're trying to get people to think about things in a different way than they customarily do. So you may have a very contrarian attitude, and that's going to appeal to different people. And I'll give you these slides, so don't sweat about all the detail here. I'm trying to just give you a sense that there are different ways of thinking about these different attractors here, and I'm trying to identify a number of them to help you be able to use them. Similarly, with the you might have content that helps people really see a change that's about to happen, maybe in 2 years' time, and it seems very abstract. So you're able to give them a real concrete sense of what that change will be like. You have a very visionary attitude in your content. The experience you offer can be a very important attractor in content. So let's imagine that you're involved in an industry that's famous for producing very dry, factual content. Maybe you work in something like insurance. And you choose to make some content that's humorous. Now, that's going to appeal to some individuals. It's not going to appeal to everyone, and it doesn't have to appeal to everyone. And that's the point, is that not all your content has to sound the same, and it doesn't have to appeal to everyone. But if you have something distinctive in the experience you offer with your content, that's going to help you be much more connected with audiences that might be interested in that. Can you just hold on that? Because I'm not sure how quickly I'll get through this, but I'll definitely take it after. How you reveal things is also a very important attractor. So you may provide, for example, sort of a behind-the-scenes insight into something that happens, and most people aren't aware of this, and now they have some clarity around it. And that's, that could be very important to people, and they find that very enjoyable. And how you tell your stories. So maybe you tell stories in a special way. You highlight the critical turning point that made a difference in the outcome of something. Or you create a series of stories where you compare how things are today with how they were in the past, and it really helps people see the amount of change that's happened. Now, all these things I'm talking about here are nothing new. I haven't invented them. You all are very familiar with them. These are techniques that good storytellers and good writers use all the time. What I am suggesting that's new is that we actually formally characterize our content with these qualities using metadata descriptors. And the benefit of doing this is that we can actually measure the performance of our content according to these descriptors. And we can also reuse this content in different contexts. And that's very powerful. So you think about how most organizations now work with this kind of content. They will create some content around a general topic, and there'll be some big idea informing this content, and they'll run a marketing campaign of a certain duration. And when that campaign is over, the content is forgotten about, and they move on to the next campaign. But everyone has seen the same content who's interacted with the brand. What I would like to see is that we get a lot more individual in the content we present to people based on who they are. And we can reuse this in different situations. And the way we're going to do that is through rethinking how we make recommendations. So for most organizations that make recommendations now, they have a very data-centric way of doing it. And they will get data on lots and lots of variables. Sometimes the data is very shallow. There's not a lot of data for this variable, but there are lots of variables. And the problem with this is it makes for very noisy recommendations. You got a lot of spurious sort of recommendations, and that's why people get very confused when they see their recommendations. What I'm suggesting is that we actually go back to the essence of things, and we think about what really matters to people. And I think that's the attractors in your content. So we don't necessarily know who is looking at your content. We don't necessarily know why they're there. But we do know if they've gotten to the end of an article or the end of a video that you've created, that's probably a strong indication that they're interested in what you've produced. And they may want to see something more of that. So let's suggest other content on that same general topic with those same qualities and see if they like it. And my prediction is that if we do this, we're going to have much greater success with our recommendations than we do now, because we're not doing very well right now with how we make recommendations. Now, I know I've talked about big data is not the answer, but analytics are important as long as we are measuring things that matter. And I think by measuring the qualities of our content, we actually can see the performance of our content according to its qualities, what attractors are performing well. And we can see how effective our recommendations are. And as appropriate, we can make adjustments. So we may need to change our tags, or we may need to change how we do the precise matching based on the inventory of content we have or the number of descriptors we have. But probably the most important thing we can do is change the content we're actually offering. So we can see if certain content is in demand, there's a lot of interest in it from audiences, we can produce more of that content that has those qualities. And that's very powerful. So I know it's a noisy world out there. There's a lot of content. I don't think that being narrow is the way to go when we're trying to connect on an emotional level. I mean, people are always going to have very utilitarian needs for their content, and it's appropriate to make sure you serve that specific need when someone has a need. But when we're talking about wants, what people want to spend their time with, we want to think about general interests, things that are going to appeal to a wide range of people. But we need to think about distinctions that matter, what individuals really care about, the way that the content's presented. And I think it's connecting the broad potential of broad topics with the specific interest of individuals in the way they have their content presented to them, which is the power of this approach. So this is a new approach. It's new even for the New York Times. I think it's going to require some experimentation to really make it fully effective. And I know some organizations are very reluctant to experiment. They want someone else to solve the problem, and then they will copy it. But I think this is urgent enough that we can't wait for someone else to solve it, because we're not doing very well with our recommendations. And the cost of that is that you're not getting the relationship as a brand with people you want to be connecting with. The audiences aren't having a good experience. They're not perceiving you in the right way. And I think if we make the content recommendations more relevant to people based on their wants, how they want to see and receive content, they're going to have a better perception of you as a brand as being attuned to their interests. And that's going to be hugely powerful. So sell your team on the benefits of this, even though I know it seems like it's something new, and who wants to try something new when everyone has lots to just get done in their day-to-day work. See the big upside of this. And also, I encourage you to reach out to the wider content strategy community, the people in this room, the people in this conference, and the wider community online, and ask questions of people when you're working through this. What do they think? Because I think there are a lot of us who are interested in this topic of qualities, of how to position content, how to make it more effective, and there's probably a lot of collective knowledge that we can all tap into. And ask your questions, share with others what you're learning, and I would hope that we can collectively be able to develop this new approach and make it much more commonplace. So I want to thank you for letting me share my ideas with you, and I would expect that you may have a few questions, so I've intentionally tried to leave a couple minutes for that. Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael.